Tonight, we're stepping through the ornate gates of Versailles, but not as tourists marveling at golden halls and crystal chandeliers. Instead, we're descending into the shadows beneath the glitter, into the world of those who made royal luxury possible. If you'd like to support this journey, a like, a comment, or a quiet subscription can help keep the candle burning. Just a small gesture, but deeply appreciated. But first, I want to thank you for being here tonight. It means a lot that you're here, allowing my voice to keep you company in this calm space before sleep. And if you feel like sharing, tell me in the comments which historical era would you visit. If you could dream yourself there tonight, let your imagination wander, and let's collect these night travels one by one. This is Educational Bedtime, where the stories are long, the tone stays soft, and the past unfolds slowly, like parchment beneath candlelight. Now, find a comfortable position. Let your shoulders sink, let your breath deepen, and your thoughts quiet down, like dust settling on ancient stone. So settle into your bed, pull your comfortable blankets close, and let your mind wander back 3 centuries to a time when the fate of an entire nation played out in the corridors of a single, extraordinary palace. Let the rhythm of history carry you toward restful sleep. Over the next 2 hours, we'll journey through 4 distinct worlds within the same palace walls. We'll begin in the pre-dawn darkness of the servants' quarters, then follow the tragic arc of a queen trapped by her own privilege. We'll explore the hidden passages that held the palace's deepest secrets, and finally witness the golden cage that imprisoned even the most powerful king in European history. Imagine yourself not as a pampered courtier, but as one of the thousands of servants who lived and worked in the most opulent palace ever built. Close your eyes and let yourself be transported to a world where beauty and brutality existed side by side, where the price of magnificence was measured in human exhaustion and quiet desperation. Chapter 1: The Servants' Dawn. Life in the palace shadows. The church bells of Versailles have not yet chimed 4 in the morning, but you're already stirring in your narrow bed. The wooden frame creaks as you shift, and the straw mattress beneath you rustles with the familiar sound that has become the soundtrack of your existence. Around you, in the cramped servants' quarters tucked away in the palace's forgotten corners, dozens of other bodies are beginning their daily resurrection from exhaustion. You are a servant at Versailles, and this is your world, a world that exists in the margins of magnificence, in the spaces between the grand apartments where kings and queens hold court. Your room, if it can be called that, is barely larger than a coffin. The single window, no bigger than a prayer book, offers only a view of another palace wall, so close you could reach out and touch the weathered stones that have witnessed centuries of similar dawns. The morning light, when it finally comes, will be filtered and grey, nothing like the golden illumination that pours through the hall of mirrors just floors above your head. The wooden floor beneath your feet is cold and unforgiving as you rise. There's no carpet here, no tapestry to soften the harsh edges of your daily existence. The walls are plain limestone, sometimes covered with a thin layer of plaster that flakes away in the dampness, leaving white powder on your clothes and in your hair. In winter, frost forms on the inside of that tiny window, and your breath mists in the air as you dress in the pre-dawn darkness, your fingers numb and clumsy as they fumble with the worn fabric of your garments. The hierarchy among servants is as rigid and unforgiving as the stone walls that surround you. At the bottom of this carefully constructed social ladder, you might find yourself emptying chamber pots and scrubbing floors, your hands raw from lye soap and cold water that never seems to warm no matter how long you work with it, where the smell of waste and cleaning agents becomes so familiar that you cease to notice it. Though visitors to the servants' quarters often cover their noses with handkerchiefs scented with rosewater, their faces contorting in disgust at the reality of life beneath the palace's golden veneer. Your clothing is simple, practical, and perpetually worn. The coarse linen has been mended so many times that the original color is difficult to determine. What might once have been brown has faded to a muddy gray, and what might have been blue has become the color of old bruises. Your shoes, if you're fortunate enough to have them, are thin-soled and offer little protection against the cold stone floors you'll traverse for the next 18 hours. Many of your fellow servants wrap their feet in rags, creating a soft shuffling sound that echoes through the corridors like whispered prayers for better days that never seem to come. If you've risen slightly in the ranks, perhaps you tend the fires that must be lit before the nobles wake. This means carrying heavy buckets of coal up narrow, winding staircases that seem designed to test the limits of human endurance. your back aching by the time you reach the third or fourth floor, as soot blackens your hands and face, and no amount of washing ever seems to remove it completely from under your fingernails or from the creases around your eyes. You become a creature marked by your labor, permanently stained by the work that keeps others warm and comfortable. The kitchen servants face their own particular challenges in the vast culinary empire that feeds the palace. The main kitchens of Versailles are located in the basement, far from the dining halls where the food will eventually be served to nobles who never consider the journey their meals have taken. These underground chambers are perpetually thick with steam, smoke, and the overwhelming scent of cooking food mixed with burning wood and charcoal. The heat is so intense that many kitchen workers strip to their undergarments, sweat pouring down their faces as they tend enormous roasting spits and bubbling cauldrons that seem to contain enough food to feed entire villages. Imagine yourself carrying a heavy silver tray of delicate pastries up 4 flights of stairs, your arms trembling with the effort, knowing that a single stumble could mean not just the loss of the food, but the loss of your position and the roof over your head. The corridors you navigate are often dark, lit only by occasional candles that create dancing shadows on the walls, making the familiar palace seem like a maze designed by demons. Other servants brush past you in the narrow passages, everyone moving with the urgent purpose of people who understand that delay means punishment, demotion, or worse. The waste management of a palace housing thousands of people falls largely on the shoulders of the lowest servants, those whose names are never recorded and whose contributions are never acknowledged. Chamber pots from the royal apartments must be collected, emptied, and cleaned multiple times throughout the day. The smell is overwhelming, a mixture of human waste, stale perfume, and the harsh lye used for cleaning that burns your nostrils and makes your eyes water. There's no running water in most of the palace, so this waste must be carried in heavy buckets downstairs and through corridors to disposal areas outside the main buildings, a journey that tests both physical strength and mental fortitude. Your hands are never truly clean. The harsh soaps available to servants strip the skin, leaving it cracked and bleeding, with wounds that heal slowly in the damp conditions of the servants' quarters. In winter, the combination of cold air and constant washing creates painful sores that never seem to heal properly. Weeping wounds that you wrap in rags when you can, but often the demands of your work require bare fingers for delicate tasks, like arranging flowers or polishing silver. The meals provided to servants are a stark contrast to the elaborate feasts served in the royal dining rooms, a daily reminder of your place in the palace hierarchy. A breakfast, if it comes at all, might consist of a piece of dark bread, perhaps spread with a thin layer of lard, that has gone slightly rancid in the warm kitchen. The bread is often stale, sometimes mouldy, but hunger makes it palatable, and you learn to cut away the worst parts and make do with what remains. A weak beer or watered wine might accompany this meal, more for the safety of consuming something other than the questionable water than for pleasure or nutrition. Sleep, when it finally comes, is fitful and brief. The servants' quarters are never truly quiet, a constant symphony of human activity that reflects the palace's relentless demands. People come and go at all hours, attending to the needs of nobles who keep no regular schedule and who summon service at their whim. The wooden floors creak under hurried footsteps, voices whisper urgent messages in half a dozen languages, and the constant background noise of a palace that never sleeps filters through the thin walls like water through cloth. Your midday meal is usually a thin soup, made from vegetable scraps and occasionally flavored with a small piece of meat that might once have graced a noble table. The soup is served in wooden bowls that are rarely washed thoroughly, carrying the lingering taste of previous meals and the accumulated grime of countless servings. You eat quickly, standing in the servants' hall, because your time is not your own, and duty calls from every corner of the palace. The afternoon and evening often pass without another meal, leaving you to work through the long hours with an empty stomach and growing weakness that makes even simple tasks feel monumental. In winter, the cold is bone deep and relentless, a living thing that seems to creep through every crack and crevice. The servants' quarters receive no heat from the great fireplaces that warm the royal apartments, those magnificent hearths that consume more wood in a day than most families see in a year. You sleep in your clothes, often sharing your narrow bed with another servant for warmth, your bodies pressed together not from affection but from the simple necessity of survival. The air is so cold that water freezes in the washing basins, and you must break the ice each morning before you can attempt to clean yourself. The shock of the frozen water on your skin, serving as a brutal awakening to another day of labor. The summer brings different challenges. but no relief from hardship. The same rooms that are freezing in winter become stifling in the heat. The stone walls that trap cold in winter now trap heat like ovens. The small windows provide little ventilation, and the smell of too many unwashed bodies in close quarters becomes overwhelming. A thick miasma that seems to coat your throat and lungs. Insects breed in the straw mattresses and wooden bed frames, and the constant itching of flea and louse bites becomes another fact of daily existence. Tiny torments that add to the larger sufferings of servant life. Your workday begins before dawn and ends well after sunset, a relentless cycle that knows no variation. There are no days off, no holidays, no time that is purely your own. But even when you're not actively working, you must be available at a moment's notice. Sleeping with one ear, always listening for the bells that might summon you to urgent service. The bell might ring at any hour, summoning you to attend to some urgent need of the household, and failure to respond quickly enough results in punishment that can range from a reduction in already meager rations to dismissal from the palace entirely. The threat of dismissal hangs over every servant like a sword suspended by the thinnest of threads. Without the protection of the palace walls, you would face the harsh realities of life in 18th century France, a world where employment opportunities are scarce and survival often depends on charity or crime. A servant dismissed from Versailles carries the stigma of failure, a mark that follows them like a shadow and makes finding new employment nearly impossible. Many who lose their positions end up begging on the streets of Paris or working in conditions far worse than those they left behind, their stories serving as warnings to those who remain. The social dynamics among servants create their own form of stress, a complex web of alliances and rivalries that can be as treacherous as the politics of the court itself. Competition for the favor of higher-ranking servants and minor nobles is fierce, a daily battle fought with whispered information and careful observation. And information becomes currency in this underground economy, and the ability to predict the needs and desires of your superiors can mean the difference between advancement and stagnation. Trust is a luxury few servants can afford, as today's ally might be tomorrow's rival for a coveted position, or today's friend might be tomorrow's informant. Your body bears the constant marks of your labor, a living testament to the physical demands of service. Your hands are permanently stained and scarred from cleaning chemicals and rough surfaces, the skin so damaged that it never fully heals. Your back aches from bending over wash basins and carrying heavy loads. The vertebrae compressed from years of stooping and lifting, your feet are swollen and blistered from the endless hours spent standing on stone floors, the arches fallen and the toes deformed from ill-fitting shoes or no shoes at all. The physical toll of servant life ages you rapidly, and many who enter service as teenagers appear middle-aged by their 20s, their bodies worn down by the relentless demands of palace life. The psychological weight of constant subservience creates its own form of exhaustion, a weariness that goes deeper than physical fatigue. You must always be alert to the moods and whims of your superiors, ready to anticipate their needs before they're even expressed. Like a hunting dog trained scents its master's intentions, a smile when solemnity is expected, or a grave expression when cheerfulness is desired, can result in harsh punishment that teaches you to guard your face as carefully as you guard your tongue. As you learn to read faces, to interpret the subtle signs that indicate whether this is a day for invisibility or attentiveness, whether to meet eyes or lower them, whether to speak or remain silent. As the hours pass in this first segment of our journey, imagine yourself moving through these routines day after day, year after year, until they become as natural as breathing. Far, the magnificent palace that draws visitors from around the world becomes a prison of routine and exhaustion, its golden halls built on the foundation of human endurance pushed to its limits. The contrast between your world and the world of those you serve is stark and constant, a daily reminder of the vast gulf that separates human experiences even within the same building. As you empty chamber pots, they debate philosophy in rooms filled with priceless art. As you scrub floors until your knees bleed, they dance at elaborate balls that cost more than you'll earn in a lifetime. As you struggle to find enough food to maintain your strength, they complain about the delicate seasoning of their seventh course, their greatest concern being whether the sauce achieves the perfect balance of flavors. This contrast is not just a matter of wealth or social position, it's a fundamental difference in the value placed on human dignity and comfort, a system that treats some people as precious beyond measure, while treating others as barely more valuable than the tools they use. Yet within this harsh world, Small moments of humanity persist like flowers growing through cracks in stone. Servants form bonds of friendship and mutual support that help them survive the daily grind. Relationships forged in shared suffering that often prove stronger than those formed in comfort. A shared crust of bread becomes a communion. A moment of rest stolen in a quiet corridor becomes a sanctuary. A gentle word of encouragement from a fellow worker becomes a lifeline in the darkness. These tiny acts of kindness become precious beyond measure. Small lights that illuminate the humanity that persists even in the most dehumanizing circumstances. The servants of Versailles were not just anonymous figures in history, faceless masses whose only purpose was to serve others. They were individuals with hopes, dreams, fears, and families. People who fell in love despite their circumstances, who worried about their children's futures, who mourned their losses with the same depth of feeling as any noble, and who celebrated their small victories with joy that was no less real for being quiet. Their lives were shaped by the grand historical forces that swirled around them, but they remained fundamentally human in their struggles and aspirations, their capacity for love and hope undiminished by the hardships they endured. Many servants carried with them memories of the villages and farms they had left behind, places where they had known different kinds of hardship, but also different kinds of freedom. They remembered seasons that mattered, harvests that brought genuine celebration, families that gathered without ceremony or protocol. These memories sustained them through the darkest moments of palace life, reminders that there were other ways to live, and other definitions of worth beyond the arbitrary hierarchies that governed their daily existence. The religious life of servants provided another source of comfort and community, though even their faith had to be practiced within the constraints of palace protocol. Simple prayers became precious, moments of connection with something larger than the daily round of duties and humiliations. Many servants found in their faith a sense of dignity that no amount of mistreatment could strip away, a knowledge that they were valued by God even if they were not valued by their earthly masters. Some servants developed skills that transcended their humble positions, becoming experts in their crafts, despite the lack of formal training or recognition. A kitchen servant might develop an extraordinary palate, able to season dishes with an artistry that rivaled the most celebrated chefs. A cleaning servant might develop an intimate knowledge of art and architecture, learning to appreciate beauty even while being considered unworthy to enjoy it. These hidden talents and knowledge represented forms of wealth that could not be taken away, treasures of the mind and spirit that survived even the harshest conditions. The children of servants faced their own particular challenges, growing up in a world where their futures were largely predetermined by their parents' positions. Many began working at ages that would shock modern sensibilities, their childhood sacrificed to the demands of palace life. Yet even these youngest members of the servant community found ways to play, to learn, to dream of different futures, their resilience a testament to the indomitable nature of human hope. Letters and diaries that survive from servant life at Versailles reveal the full complexity of their experiences, the mixture of pride and resentment, ambition and resignation that characterized their daily existence. Some servants took genuine pride in their work, finding satisfaction in maintaining the beauty and order of the palace, even if they could not share in its luxuries. Others nursed deep resentments that would eventually find expression in the revolutionary fervor that swept France in the final decades of the monarchy. The seasonal rhythms of palace life created their own patterns of hardship and relief for the servant community. Spring brought the return of the court from Paris, meaning more work but also more opportunities for employment and advancement. Summer brought the royal hunts and outdoor festivities that required different kinds of service, but offered occasional glimpses of the natural world beyond the palace walls. Autumn brought the harvest festivals that even servants could sometimes enjoy, moments of genuine celebration that connected them to the agricultural rhythms that still governed French life. Winter brought the court season in full swing, with its demanding social calendar but also its relative predictability. The medical care available to servants was primitive by any standard, a stark contrast to the attention lavished on noble health. Simple injuries could become life-threatening infections, and illnesses that would be minor inconveniences for the wealthy could mean death for those without resources. Many servants learned to treat themselves and each other, developing folk medicine traditions that combined practical knowledge with desperate hope. The constant threat of disease and injury added another layer of anxiety to already difficult lives. The knowledge that a single accident or illness could end not just employment but life itself. As you drift deeper into relaxation, let yourself feel the weight of these lives. The quiet dignity of people who endured extraordinary hardship to serve others. Their stories remind us that behind every monument to human achievement lies the sacrifice of ordinary people who made extraordinary things possible, whose labor and suffering enabled the creation of beauty and culture that still inspires us today. They were the invisible hands that created visible splendor, the quiet voices that enabled the loud proclamations of power, the forgotten people who made history possible through their daily acts of service and sacrifice. The rhythm of servant life at Versailles was relentless, but predictable, a pattern that provided its own form of comfort, even in the midst of hardship. Tomorrow would bring the same early rising, the same endless tasks, the same small struggles for dignity and survival, but it would also bring the same small kindnesses, the same moments of human connection, the same quiet persistence that has always characterized the human spirit in the face of adversity. In this world of shadows and service, of magnificence and misery, the servants of Versailles carved out their own forms of meaning and purpose, finding ways to maintain their humanity, even in circumstances designed to deny it. Chapter 2: Marie Antoinette's Beauty Trap. The Queen's Desperate Game. As the servants below begin their endless day of labor, let us ascend the marble staircases to the royal apartments, where a different kind of prison awaits. Here, in rooms draped with silk and adorned with gold, we find perhaps the most famous victim of Versailles' gilded cage, Marie Antoinette, the Austrian princess, who became France's most misunderstood queen, a woman whose every breath was monitored, whose every gesture was interpreted, and whose very existence became a performance that she could never escape. Picture yourself as a 14-year-old girl, torn from everything familiar, traveling across Europe in an elaborate procession toward a destiny you barely comprehend. Marie Antoinette's journey from Vienna to Versailles in 1770 was not just a change of residence. It was a transformation from a relatively free-spirited Austrian archduchess into a symbol of French royal power, a living ornament designed to cement political alliances and produce royal heirs. The carriage that carried her was itself a mobile palace, lined with crimson silk and cushioned with down from the finest swans. Yet for all its luxury, it was also a cage, carrying her toward a life where every gesture, every expression, every choice of dress would be scrutinized and judged by thousands of watching eyes. The rhythmic sound of horses' hooves on cobblestones marked the countdown to a fate that would consume her entirely, each mile bringing her closer to a world governed by rules so complex and contradictory that they seemed designed more to trap than to guide. The French court operated according to an etiquette so elaborate that entire books were written just to explain the proper way to hand a glass of water to a duchess, or the correct angle at which to bow when encountering a prince of the blood. For a young woman raised in the relatively informal Austrian court, these Byzantine protocols would prove to be a constant source of anxiety and confusion. Upon her arrival at Versailles, Marie Antoinette discovered that her new world operated according to principles that defied logic and humanity. The ceremony of her formal presentation to the French court was a carefully orchestrated performance, where every bow, every smile, every word had been predetermined by centuries of protocol that treated human beings as chess pieces in an elaborate game of power and precedence. She was no longer Marie Antoinette the person, with her own thoughts, feelings and desires. She had become Marie Antoinette the institution, a living symbol whose primary purpose was to embody the alliance between Austria and France, regardless of her personal happiness or well-being. The morning routine that began Marie Antoinette's day was a theatrical production that could last for hours, a complex ballet of ceremony that transformed the simple act of getting dressed into an elaborate state function. Her lever, the formal ceremony of rising and dressing, involved dozens of court ladies arranged in strict hierarchical order, each woman's position determined by an intricate calculus of birth, marriage and royal favor that could change from day to day. The privilege of handing the queen her chemise belonged to the highest-ranking duchess present, but if a more senior lady arrived mid-ceremony, the chemise would be passed backwards through the ranks until it reached the appropriate hands, while the queen stood naked and shivering in the cold morning air of her bedchamber. Imagine yourself standing motionless for an hour or more, while this elaborate dance of precedence played out around you, your arms growing numb, your feet aching, and the morning chill seeping into your bones, until you felt as cold and lifeless as the marble statues that decorated your apartments. Yet any sign of impatience or discomfort would be noted and whispered about throughout the palace, becoming fodder for the endless gossip mill that turned every human frailty into political ammunition. The Queen's body belonged not to herself but to the state, and even her physical comfort was secondary to the maintenance of court protocol that treated her as a sacred object rather than a living woman. The process of selecting the Queen's dress for the day was another elaborate ritual that could consume precious hours of morning time. Dozens of gowns would be presented by the mistress of the wardrobe, each representing different political and social messages that extended far beyond mere fashion. The choice of color might indicate favor or disfavor towards certain courtiers, blue suggesting support for French traditions while white might signal Austrian sympathies. The style could suggest alignment with French or Austrian fashions, each carrying its own political implications that could affect international relations. But what appeared to be a simple decision about clothing was actually a complex negotiation of court politics and diplomatic strategy, where the wrong choice could create enemies or send unintended messages to foreign courts. Marie Antoinette's hair became a canvas for increasingly elaborate architectural fantasies that defied both gravity and common sense. Her coiffeur, the famous Léonard Ortier, would spend hours each morning constructing towering sculptures of powdered hair, adorned with ribbons, feathers, flowers, and sometimes even miniature ships or garden scenes that commemorated current events or celebrated royal achievements. These creations were so tall and unstable that the Queen often had to sleep sitting upright to preserve them for multiple days, her neck supported by specially designed pillows that left her constantly uncomfortable. The weight of the hairpieces caused constant headaches that no amount of laudanum could completely relieve, and the powder created a cloud of white dust that settled on everything in the room, coating furniture, clothing, and lungs with a fine film that smelled of rice flour and orris root. The physical discomfort of these beauty rituals was matched by their psychological burden, the constant awareness that her appearance was not her own, but belonged to France and its people. Every aspect of Marie Antoinette's appearance was subject to public commentary and criticism that could be vicious in its intensity. Too much rouge, and she was accused of vanity and frivolity, of caring more for her appearance than for the welfare of her subjects. Too little, and she appeared unhealthy or melancholy, raising concerns about her ability to fulfill her duties as queen. The wrong shade of silk, and she was criticized for poor taste or inappropriate extravagance. The right shade, and she was accused of bankrupting the royal treasury with her impossible demands for luxury. There was no choice that would not generate criticism from some quarter of the court, no decision that would not be interpreted as evidence of some character flaw or political failing. The Queen existed in a state of perpetual judgment, where every breath was weighed, every glance measured, and every word dissected for hidden meanings that might not even exist. This constant scrutiny created a psychological pressure that few human beings could withstand without developing some form of defensive mechanism, whether withdrawal, defiance, or the cultivation of a public persona so artificial that it bore little resemblance to the private person beneath. The pressure to produce an heir created another layer of torment for the young queen, transforming the most intimate aspects of human experience into matters of state concern. And her marriage to the future Louis XVI was troubled from the beginning, complicated by the king's shyness and sexual inexperience, combined with the public nature of royal marriage that left no room for private development of intimacy. The royal bedroom was not a place of love, but a stage where the continuation of the dynasty was expected to unfold according to schedule, with courtiers speculating openly about the frequency of the royal couple's intimate encounters, and physicians monitoring every aspect of the Queen's reproductive health. For 7 long years, Marie Antoinette endured the monthly cycle of hope and disappointment, expectation and failure, as the court and the nation waited for news of a pregnancy that seemed to elude her. Each month that passed without the announcement of an heir was seen as a personal failure, a dereliction of her primary duty as queen that overshadowed any other contributions she might make to French society. The court physicians subjected her to examinations and treatments that were both humiliating and ineffective, their medieval understanding of female reproduction leading to remedies that ranged from the merely uncomfortable to the genuinely dangerous. Special diets were prescribed that left her constantly hungry, herbal remedies were administered that made her sick, and mechanical devices were employed that caused pain without providing relief. The Queen's monthly cycles were monitored with the intensity of a military campaign, with servants instructed to report every detail of her physical condition to the court certains, who then shared this information with ministers and ambassadors who treated her reproductive health as a matter of international significance. The most private aspects of her existence became public property, discussed in council meetings and diplomatic correspondence, as if her body were a piece of state machinery that had broken down and needed repair. The Queen's gambling addiction began as a form of escape from these overwhelming pressures, but quickly became another source of scandal and financial strain that added to her growing reputation for extravagance and irresponsibility. The card tables at Versailles were scenes of intense social and political maneuvering, where fortunes were won and lost with the turn of a card, and where the Queen found one of the few arenas where she could exercise some control over her fate. Here, skill and luck mattered more than protocol and precedence, and for a few hours each evening, she could forget the weight of royal expectations and lose herself in the excitement of chance. The amounts she wagered was staggering by any standard, reflecting both her desperation for escape and her complete disconnection from the financial realities that governed the lives of ordinary French citizens. A single evening's losses could exceed the annual income of a comfortable bourgeois family, and her gambling debts created a constant financial crisis that her advisors struggled to manage without revealing the extent of the problem to the public. Secret loans were arranged with Jewish bankers and foreign merchants, jewelry was pawned to cover immediate debts, and desperate letters were sent to her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, begging for financial assistance that came with stern lectures about royal dignity and proper behavior. The woman who was seen as the symbol of French wealth and power was actually living in a state of perpetual financial anxiety, constantly juggling debts and obligations that threatened to expose her gambling addiction to public scrutiny. Her financial troubles created additional pressure to maintain the appearance of effortless luxury, leading to even more extravagant spending on clothes, jewelry, and entertainments that she hoped would distract attention from her money problems. The cycle of debt and display created a spiral of financial irresponsibility that would eventually contribute to the larger fiscal crisis that helped precipitate the French Revolution. The diamond necklace affair of 1785 revealed the extent to which Marie Antoinette had become a prisoner of her own reputation, a victim of public perception that bore little resemblance to reality, but proved more powerful than truth. The scandal involved an elaborate confidence game orchestrated by the Countess de la Motte, a minor noblewoman with major debts and no scruples about exploiting the Queen's reputation for her own benefit. The Countess convinced Cardinal de Rohan, who had fallen from royal favour and was desperate to restore his position, that the Queen wanted to secretly purchase an enormously expensive diamond necklace, but needed him to act as intermediary to avoid public criticism of her extravagance. The Cardinal, eager to regain royal favour and blinded by his own ambition, agreed to guarantee the purchase without ever speaking directly to the Queen, relying instead on forged letters and a prostitute who impersonated Marie Antoinette in a brief nighttime meeting in the palace gardens. The necklace, worth more than a warship and containing some of the finest diamonds ever assembled in a single piece, was delivered to the Countess's accomplices, who immediately broke it apart and sold the individual stones to finance their escape from France. When the jewelers came to collect payment, the elaborate fraud unraveled, leaving the Cardinal facing bankruptcy and the Queen facing accusations of corruption and sexual impropriety, despite being entirely innocent of any wrongdoing. When the scheme unraveled, Marie Antoinette found herself accused not only of financial impropriety, but of conducting a secret affair with the Cardinal, despite the fact that she barely knew him and had no involvement whatsoever in the purchase of the necklace. The public trial that followed became a sensation throughout France and beyond, with pamphlets and broadsheets spreading increasingly lurid versions of the story that portrayed the Queen as everything from a spendthrift to a nymphomaniac. The Queen's attempts to defend herself only seemed to make the situation worse, as any public statement was seen as undignified and inappropriate for a person of her exalted station, while her silence was interpreted as an admission of guilt. The diamond necklace affair marked a turning point in Marie Antoinette's public reputation, transforming her from an unpopular but relatively harmless figure into a symbol of everything that was wrong with the French monarchy. Her association with the scandal, however unjust, provided her enemies with ammunition that they would use for the rest of her life, and the public's willingness to believe the worst about her revealed the depth of resentment that had been building against the royal family for decades. The affair also demonstrated the power of public opinion in an age when printing had made the rapid spread of information possible, foreshadowing the role that popular sentiment would play in the coming revolution. Her famous retreat to the Petit Trianon, a small palace on the grounds of Versailles that Louis XVI had given her as a private refuge, became both a sanctuary and another source of scandal. Here, she attempted to create a space where she could experience some semblance of normal human interaction, free from the suffocating protocols that governed life in the main palace. The Petit Trianon was decorated in a more intimate style, with smaller rooms, simpler furniture, and gardens designed for private enjoyment rather than public display. It was here that the Queen could entertain friends without worrying about precedence, eat meals without ceremony, and engage in conversations that were not calculated for political effect. The psychological toll of constant public scrutiny and criticism began to show in Marie Antoinette's behavior as the 1780s progressed, transforming the relatively carefree young woman who had arrived from Austria into someone more guarded, more suspicious, and more prone to withdrawal from public life. She became increasingly reluctant to participate in court ceremonies, preferring the company of a small circle of intimate friends to the formal gatherings that had once been her primary social outlet. This withdrawal, while understandable given the circumstances, only fueled further criticism from courtiers who saw her absence as evidence of laziness or disdain for French customs and traditions. At the Petit Trianon, Marie Antoinette created an elaborate fantasy of pastoral life that revealed both her longing for simplicity and her complete disconnection from the realities of rural France. The famous hameau, or mock village, was constructed to resemble an idealized French farming community, complete with thatched roof cottages, a working mill, and farm animals that were kept as clean and well-fed as pets. The Queen and her ladies would dress as shepherdesses and milkmaids, playing at rural life while actual farmers worked the fields beyond the palace walls and struggled to feed their families on the taxes they paid to support royal extravagance. This expensive fantasy became another source of public criticism, as observers noted the cruel irony of a queen playing at poverty while her subjects struggled with actual hardship that she seemed unable or unwilling to comprehend. The hameau cost more to build and maintain than many villages generated in tax revenue, and its existence became a symbol of royal excess that critics would invoke for decades to come. The Queen's innocent desire for a simpler life had been transformed, through the lens of public perception and political necessity, into evidence of her fundamental unsuitability for the role she had been born to fill. The Queen's attempts to be a good mother to her children were also subject to public scrutiny and criticism that turned even the most natural maternal impulses into matters of political controversy. Her decision to breastfeed her own children, rather than employing wet nurses as was customary for royal mothers, was seen as both admirably natural and inappropriately common, depending on the political sympathies of the observer. Her displays of maternal affection were criticized as unseemly for a queen, while any moments of maternal frustration or fatigue were seized upon as evidence of her unsuitability for motherhood, and by extension for queenship itself. The birth of her first child, Marie Thérèse, in 1778, brought temporary relief from the pressure to produce an heir, but also introduced new anxieties about child-rearing and maternal responsibility that added another layer of complexity to her already difficult existence. The royal nursery was a public institution, with its own staff, its own protocols, and its own forms of ceremony that transformed the simple act of caring for children into another performance subject to observation and criticism. Even her private moments with her children were often interrupted by the demands of court life, and the Queen struggled to balance her maternal instincts with the expectations of her royal role. As political tensions in France began to rise during the 1780s, Marie Antoinette became a convenient scapegoat for the nation's mounting problems. A foreign woman whose every action could be interpreted as evidence of disloyalty or corruption. The Queen, who had once been celebrated as a symbol of beauty and grace, was now portrayed in popular pamphlets as a foreign agent, a spendthrift, and a corrupting influence on French society whose very presence threatened the stability of the monarchy. The nickname l'Autrichienne, or the Austrian, was used to emphasize her foreign origins and suggest that her primary loyalty was to Austria rather than France, making her a perpetual outsider in the country she was supposed to represent. The Queen's correspondence with her family in Austria was monitored and sometimes intercepted by French agents, providing fodder for accusations of treason and espionage that were often based more on suspicion than evidence. Her natural concern for her birth family was reinterpreted as evidence of divided loyalties, and her attempts to maintain neutrality in conflicts between France and Austria were seen as suspicious rather than diplomatic. Even her private expressions of homesickness or nostalgia for Austrian customs were taken as proof that she had never truly become French in her heart, as if national identity was something that could be changed as easily as clothing. The financial crisis that gripped France in the late 1780s was increasingly blamed on royal extravagance, with Marie Antoinette bearing the brunt of public anger, despite the fact that the monarchy's fiscal problems had deep structural roots that predated her arrival in France by decades. The famous phrase, "let them eat cake," though almost certainly never spoken by the Queen, became permanently associated with her image as someone completely disconnected from the suffering of ordinary people. The reality was more complex. The Queen was often unaware of the extent of popular suffering, not because she was callous but because the elaborate protocols of court life shielded her from any direct contact with the common people whose lives were affected by royal policy. When the revolution began in 1789, Marie Antoinette found herself trapped not just by the political chaos surrounding her, but by the reputation she had acquired over nearly 2 decades as queen, a reputation that bore little resemblance to her actual character, but proved more durable than truth. Her every action was interpreted through the lens of suspicion and hostility that had been building for years, creating a situation where even her most innocent gestures were seen as evidence of counter-revolutionary plotting or foreign manipulation. Her attempts to support moderate reform were seen as insincere attempts to preserve royal power, while her private expressions of fear and confusion were taken as evidence of guilt and conspiracy. The dramatic events of October 1789, when a crowd of Parisian women marched to Versailles and forced the royal family to return to Paris, marked the end of Marie Antoinette's life as Queen of France and the beginning of her existence as a prisoner of the revolution. The woman who had once been the most powerful female figure in Europe was now at the mercy of political forces she had never understood and could not control, her fate determined by the anger of people she had never met, and the decisions of leaders who saw her not as a person, but as a symbol of everything they sought to destroy. The final years of Marie Antoinette's life were spent in increasingly desperate circumstances, as the comfortable captivity of the Tuileries Palace gave way to the harsh conditions of various prisons, where the royal family was confined under constant surveillance. The elaborate beauty routines that had once consumed hours of her day were replaced by simple practical grooming that reflected the new realities of her situation. Her silk gowns were exchanged for plain cotton dresses, her powdered hair was cut short and left its natural auburn color, and her jewelry was either confiscated or sold to pay for basic necessities. In these final months, Marie Antoinette displayed a dignity and courage that had been hidden beneath the artificial constraints of court life, revealing depths of character that her critics had never acknowledged and her supporters had never fully appreciated. She devoted herself to the care of her children and the support of her husband, finding in genuine human relationships the meaning that had been absent from her years of ceremonial existence. The woman who had been criticized for her frivolity and extravagance faced death with a composure that impressed even her enemies, discovering in extremity reserves of strength and grace that no amount of luxury had ever revealed. The trial of Marie Antoinette in 1793 was a foregone conclusion, a legal formality that served to legitimize a decision that had already been made by political forces that saw her execution as necessary for the success of the revolution. The charges against her were a mixture of genuine political grievances and fabricated accusations, ranging from financial mismanagement and counter-revolutionary activity to sexual perversion and crimes against the French people that existed more in the imagination of her accusers than in historical fact. The Queen's defense was dignified but futile. as the political climate demanded a royal sacrifice to appease the revolutionary fervour that had consumed France. On the morning of October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette was awakened in her prison cell for the final time, her execution scheduled for the afternoon in a ceremony that would mark the final destruction of the old regime. The woman who had once required hours of preparation to appear in public was given a simple white dress and a bonnet to wear to her execution, her hands bound behind her back as she was loaded onto a cart for the journey through the streets of Paris to the Place de la Révolution. The crowds that lined the streets were a mixture of curiosity seekers, political supporters, and ordinary Parisians who had come to witness the end of an era that few of them fully understood. Marie Antoinette's final words were reportedly an apology to her executioner for accidentally stepping on his foot as she mounted the scaffold, a small act of courtesy in the face of imminent death that perhaps revealed more about her true character than all the ceremonies and scandals of her years as queen. This gesture, simple and human, stripped of all pretense and political calculation, showed the woman who had been hidden beneath layers of protocol and public expectation, someone capable of kindness even in her final moments. The woman who had been portrayed as heartless and arrogant maintained her humanity even when facing the ultimate dehumanization of public execution. As you drift deeper into rest, consider the tragedy of Marie Antoinette's life, a woman whose greatest crime may have been her inability to understand the world she was born to inhabit, and whose personal failings, real and imagined, became symbols of systemic problems that were far beyond any individual's power to solve. Her story reminds us that even the most privileged existence can become a prison, and that the price of power is often paid in the currency of human happiness and authenticity that no amount of wealth can restore once it has been lost. The execution itself was swift and efficient, the product of a revolutionary machine designed to deliver quick and supposedly humane death to enemies of the people. The crowd's reaction was complex. Cheers and celebrations mixed with a sense of unease and shock that reflected the magnitude of what had just occurred. The death of a queen, even an unpopular one, represented a fundamental break with the past that left many observers unsure of what would come next, whether the revolution would bring the promised benefits, or simply replace one form of tyranny with another. The Queen's beauty trap was not just the physical rituals of cosmetics and costume, but the fundamental impossibility of being both a symbol and a person, both a public figure whose every action carried political weight, and a private individual with human needs and desires. In the end, Marie Antoinette's greatest tragedy was not her death, but her life. A life spent performing a role that left no room for the person she might have been, no space for the authentic relationships and genuine experiences that give meaning to human existence. The servants who had watched her morning routine, who had dressed her hair and laced her gowns, who had witnessed her private moments of joy and sorrow, carried with them the memory of a woman who had been both more and less than the legend that surrounded her. In their quiet conversations and whispered reminiscences, the real Marie Antoinette lived on, not as a symbol of royal excess or revolutionary justice, but as a reminder of the human cost of historical forces beyond any individual's control, and of the price that some people pay for the accidents of birth and the movements of history that sweep individuals along, like leaves in a storm. Chapter 3. The Secret Passages of Versailles. Hidden Worlds Within Walls. Now as you settle deeper into the comfortable embrace of sleep, let us leave behind the public stages where servants toiled and queens performed, and venture into the hidden arteries of Versailles, the secret passages, concealed chambers and mysterious spaces that existed in the shadows between the palace's magnificent rooms. Here, in these forgotten corridors that snake through the very bones of the palace, the true business of power was often conducted away from the watching eyes of court society, where whispers carried more weight than proclamations and secrets were the most valuable currency in the realm. Imagine yourself standing before what appears to be an ordinary wood-panelled wall in one of Versailles' countless corridors, your fingers tracing the carved mouldings that have been polished smooth by centuries of hands searching for the same hidden mechanism. The oak panels are rich with the patina of age, their surfaces adorned with intricate carvings of flowers, leaves, and royal symbols that seem purely decorative to the casual observer. But your trained fingers know what to seek, searching for the subtle irregularity that generations of servants, courtiers, and royal favorites have learned to recognize through necessity and survival. There, beneath the carved petals of a wooden rose, a barely perceptible give-in, what seemed to be solid timber, pressed gently, with just the right amount of pressure applied at precisely the correct angle, and the panel swings inward on hinges, so well oiled and perfectly balanced that they make no sound. Despite bearing the weight of centuries, the opening reveals a narrow passageway that disappears into darkness, a hidden highway that runs parallel to the opulent corridors of the palace, like a shadow world existing just beyond the reach of candlelight and public scrutiny. The servant passages of Versailles were perhaps the most extensive secret network in the palace, a labyrinthine system that allowed the army of workers to move unseen through the royal residence like blood flowing through invisible veins. These corridors were deliberately narrow, barely wide enough for a single person to pass, their dimensions calculated to ensure that servants could travel quickly and efficiently while remaining completely hidden from the noble families they served. The low ceilings force even average height individuals to stoop as they navigate the maze, their heads bowed in a posture that mirrors their social position even in these private spaces. The walls of these hidden passages are rough limestone, the same stone that forms the foundation of the palace, but left unfinished and unadorned, a stark contrast to the gilded surfaces of the public rooms they connect. Sometimes a thin layer of plaster covers the stone, but more often the walls are bare, showing the marks of the masons who carved these secret ways, and the stains left by centuries of candle smoke and human passage. But the air in these corridors carries a different quality than the perfumed atmosphere of the royal apartments, thick with the accumulated dust of ages and the lingering scents of old wood, cold stone, and the countless people who have passed this way before you. Picture yourself moving through these passages in the pre-dawn hours. A single candle, your only source of light in a darkness so complete it seems almost solid. The flame flickers in the drafts that flow through the hidden corridors like ghostly breath, casting dancing shadows that make the walls seem to breathe around you, transforming familiar passages into alien landscapes that shift and change with every step. Mere footsteps echo softly on the worn stone floors, each sound seeming magnified in the confined space, a rhythm that becomes almost hypnotic as you follow routes that have been traveled by thousands of feet over hundreds of years. These servant passages served multiple purposes beyond simple convenience, functioning as the invisible infrastructure that made the theatre of royal life possible. They were designed to maintain the carefully crafted illusion of effortless luxury that was so central to the monarchy's power, allowing meals to appear as if by magic, rooms to be cleaned while their occupants slept, and problems to be resolved without the royal family ever witnessing the effort required. The passages allowed an invisible army of workers to perform their duties without disrupting the carefully choreographed performances of court life, maintaining the fiction that royal comfort was a natural state rather than the product of human labor. The network extended vertically as well as horizontally, with hidden staircases that connected the basement kitchens to the royal apartments 4 floors above, creating a 3-dimensional maze that only the most experienced servants could navigate with confidence. These staircases were often spiral constructions, their steps worn smooth by the passage of countless feet carrying food, linens and supplies up and down the palace's many levels. The physical demands of navigating these stairs while carrying heavy loads were immense, and many servants developed the distinctive rolling gait of those who spend their lives adapting to uneven surfaces and narrow spaces, their bodies permanently shaped by the architecture they served. But the servant passages were not the only hidden spaces within Versailles. The palace contained numerous secret rooms and concealed chambers that served very different purposes. Spaces designed for security, intimacy, and the kind of private business that could not be conducted under the watchful eyes of the court. Some of these spaces were designed for emergency use, providing escape routes and safe rooms for the royal family in case of rebellion, invasion, or political crisis. Others were created for more intimate purposes, allowing for private meetings, romantic encounters, and political conspiracies that required absolute secrecy to succeed. Louis XV, perhaps more than any other monarch who ruled from Versailles, made extensive use of the palace's hidden spaces, transforming them into a parallel court where the real business of governing often took place away from the formal ceremonies and public audiences that occupied his official schedule. His famous secret staircase, known to contemporary courtiers as the Escalier des Rebelles, connected his private apartments directly to the rooms of his various mistresses, allowing him to conduct his affairs with a discretion that was impossible in the public areas of the palace, where every movement was observed and recorded. This secret staircase was a marvel of engineering and craftsmanship. its construction requiring the cooperation of trusted architects and skilled craftsmen, who were sworn to secrecy about its existence under pain of imprisonment or worse. The work was done at night, with materials brought in through the servant passages to avoid detection by the hundreds of courtiers who watched the king's every move for signs of favour or disfavour. The finished staircase was hidden behind false walls and concealed doors, its entrance disguised as part of the king's private study, complete with fake bookcases that swung open at the touch of a hidden spring. Imagine yourself ascending this hidden staircase, your hand sliding along the smooth marble banister that has guided countless royal footsteps toward clandestine meetings that shaped the fate of France. The steps are shallow and wide, designed for quiet progress rather than efficient travel, each one calculated to minimize the sound of footfalls that might alert unwanted listeners to the king's movements. Soft carpeting imported from Persia muffles your footsteps further, and the walls are lined with silk panels that absorb sound while creating an atmosphere of luxury and intimacy that stands in sharp contrast to the rough passages used by servants. Small alcoves built into the walls contain dimly burning oil lamps that provide just enough light to navigate safely while maintaining the atmosphere of secrecy and romance that made these journeys feel like adventures rather than mere travel from one room to another. The oil burns slowly and cleanly, chosen specifically to avoid the smoke and smell that might betray the staircase's use to those who might be monitoring the king's apartments for signs of unusual activity. Even the choice of oil reflects the careful planning that went into every aspect of these secret spaces where nothing was left to chance and every detail served multiple purposes. The destination of such journeys might be one of the palace's most intriguing hidden spaces, the private apartments of Madame de Pompadour or Madame du Barry, Louis XV's most famous mistresses whose influence on French politics and culture extended far beyond their romantic relationships with the king. These rooms were marvels of discreet luxury, decorated with the finest materials available, but designed to be accessed only through hidden entrances that kept their very existence secret from all but the most trusted members of the inner circle. The furniture was arranged to facilitate intimate conversation, with comfortable chairs positioned near fireplaces that provided both warmth and a romantic ambiance that encouraged confidences and conspiracies. These secret apartments often contained their own hidden chambers, rooms within rooms that served as private studies, treasure vaults, and secure locations for meetings that required absolute privacy. At Madame de Pompadour's apartments included a concealed study where she conducted correspondence with philosophers, artists, and political figures throughout Europe, using her position as the king's mistress to build networks of influence that extended far beyond the borders of France. This space was lined with books on subjects ranging from natural philosophy to political theory, and contained a secret cabinet where sensitive documents were stored behind a false back that appeared to be solid wood that actually concealed a sophisticated locking mechanism. The existence of this room was known only to the Marquise herself and her most trusted secretary, a learned man who had sworn multiple oaths of secrecy and whose life depended on his ability to keep the secrets he encountered in his daily work. This hidden study served as a parallel center of power that operated alongside but separate from the official court hierarchy, allowing Madame de Pompadour to influence policy and patronage in ways that would have been impossible through normal channels. The room's very existence was a state secret, and its discovery by enemies of the king's mistress could have led to political scandal and personal disaster. The spy networks that operated throughout Versailles made extensive use of the palace's hidden passages and concealed listening posts, creating an invisible intelligence apparatus that gathered information about private conversations, secret alliances, and hidden agendas that might affect the stability of the monarchy. The complex politics of court life generated enormous demand for information about what people said when they thought no one was listening, and professional eavesdroppers, often recruited from among the more ambitious and unscrupulous servants, developed an intimate knowledge of the palace's acoustic properties and the locations where conversations could be overheard without detection. Certain sections of the hidden passages were equipped with specially designed listening posts, small chambers positioned behind the walls of important rooms where conversations could be monitored by agents whose very existence was unknown to those they watched. These spaces were barely large enough for a single person to crouch comfortably, with carefully placed peepholes and acoustic channels that allowed observers to see and hear what transpired in the adjacent rooms while remaining completely hidden. The information gathered in these cramped, uncomfortable positions was often sold to the highest bidder, creating a thriving underground economy of secrets and surveillance that operated parallel to the official business of the court. The physical demands of this work were severe, requiring individuals who could remain motionless for hours at a time, while listening to conversations that might or might not contain useful information. Many of these professional spies developed health problems from spending long periods in cramped positions, and the psychological toll of constantly listening to other people's secrets created a peculiar form of isolation and cynicism among those who made their living from the hidden activities of the court. Yet the financial rewards could be substantial, and the information gathered in these hidden chambers sometimes influenced major decisions about war, peace, marriage, and succession that affected the fate of millions. The religious life of Versailles also generated its own network of hidden spaces, as the palace housed individuals of various faiths and beliefs who required discrete places for worship and religious observance that did not conform to the official Catholic character of the French court. Despite the monarchy's public commitment to Catholicism, practical politics required tolerance for Protestant servants and courtiers, Jewish merchants and financiers, and even occasional visits from diplomatic representatives of Muslim powers who needed appropriate spaces for their religious obligations. A hidden chapel, discovered only during renovations in the 20th century, was located behind the walls of what appeared to be a storage room in the servants' quarters, its existence forgotten for more than 2 centuries after the last generation that knew of its location died without passing on the secret. This small space contained a simple wooden altar, plain wooden benches for perhaps a dozen worshippers, and religious artifacts that suggested use by Protestant Christians who were officially unwelcome at the Catholic court, but whose skills and services were too valuable to reject entirely. The chapel's construction showed the same careful attention to secrecy that characterized other hidden spaces in the palace, with soundproofed walls that prevented hymns and prayers from being heard in adjacent rooms, and a ventilation system that dispersed the smoke from candles and incense before it could alert others to religious activity taking place in what was supposed to be an unused storage area. The chapel represented not just a place of worship, but a testament to the religious diversity that existed within the palace. Despite official policies that demanded conformity to Catholic doctrine, the mechanical marvels hidden within Versailles' walls were perhaps the most ingenious examples of concealed engineering, representing the cutting edge of 18th century technology applied to the creation of effects that seemed magical to contemporary observers. The palace contained numerous hidden mechanisms designed to create theatrical effects that enhanced the mystique of royal power, from tables that rose from the floor laden with complete meals, to walls that opened to reveal fully furnished rooms that appeared to materialize out of nowhere. These wonders relied on complex systems of counterweights, pulleys, and hydraulic mechanisms concealed within the palace's structure, operated by teams of skilled technicians who remained as invisible as the machinery they controlled. The famous table volante in Louis XV's private dining room was perhaps the most celebrated of these mechanical marvels. A dining table that could rise from the floor of the room below at the touch of a concealed button, complete with food, wine, and place settings for an intimate dinner party. The mechanism that operated this table was housed in a hidden chamber filled with gears, weights, and cables that required a team of servants to operate, their efforts coordinated with military precision to ensure that the table appeared to rise by magic rather than mechanical force. The illusion was so convincing that foreign ambassadors who witnessed it often reported back to their home courts that the French king possessed supernatural powers or access to technologies that exceeded anything known to contemporary science. The engineering required for such effects was remarkably sophisticated, involving calculations of weight, balance, and timing that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with 18th century materials and techniques. The hidden machinery required constant maintenance and adjustment, creating employment for a specialized class of palace technicians whose skills were so valuable that they were often prevented from leaving royal service lest they carry their knowledge to competing courts. These mechanical systems represented not just entertainment, but demonstrations of royal power that reinforced the idea that the king commanded forces beyond the understanding of ordinary mortals. Archaeological investigations in recent decades have revealed numerous hidden chambers and forgotten spaces within Versailles that had been sealed and lost to memory when their original purposes were no longer needed or their existence became politically inconvenient. One such discovery was a series of rooms beneath the palace's north wing that appeared to have served as a secret treasury, complete with the remains of elaborate security measures including false floors, hidden safes, and what appeared to be an early form of combination lock that required knowledge of specific sequences to open. The treasury chambers were connected to the royal apartments by a hidden passage that ran beneath the palace's foundation, wide enough for the transport of heavy chests and including several hidden security checkpoints. where guards could monitor access to the treasure rooms without being seen by those they watched. The entire system was designed to allow the royal family to access their wealth without alerting potential thieves or political enemies to the location or extent of their riches, a precaution that proved wise during the various political crises that threatened the monarchy throughout the 18th century. The discovery of these treasury chambers revealed not just their original function, but also evidence of their use during the final years of the monarchy, when the royal family was desperately trying to secure funds for their escape from France. Archaeologists found evidence of hasty removal of valuable items, including scratches on stone floors where heavy chests had been dragged, and hidden compartments that had been emptied so quickly that small items were left behind in the rush to flee. These physical traces provide a poignant reminder of the human drama that played out in these hidden spaces during the collapse of the old regime. One of the most intriguing discoveries was a hidden chamber that appeared to have served as a revolutionary meeting place during the final years of the monarchy, a room concealed behind a false wall in the servants' quarters that contained graffiti and documents suggesting it was used by palace employees who sympathized with the revolutionary cause. The irony of anti-monarchist plotting taking place in the very heart of royal power speaks to the complex loyalties and hidden tensions that existed within the palace walls, where servants who spent their days maintaining royal luxury harbored deep resentments about the system they served. The graffiti found in this room included revolutionary slogans, lists of grievances against the royal family, and what appeared to be plans for coordinated action during the early days of the revolution. The handwriting analysis suggested that the room was used by multiple individuals over several years, indicating a sustained conspiracy that operated under the noses of the palace security apparatus. The discovery of this room forced historians to reconsider the extent to which revolutionary sentiment had penetrated even the most secure spaces of the old regime, and to acknowledge the role that palace insiders played in the eventual collapse of the monarchy. The acoustic properties of Versailles' hidden passages created their own form of mystery and wonder, as sound traveled through these spaces in unexpected ways that created what appeared to be supernatural phenomena. Adult conversations in one part of the palace could be heard clearly in distant rooms through acoustic channels created by the intersection of passages and chambers, creating an effect that seemed to violate the laws of physics as understood by 18th century observers. Whispers in hidden passages could emerge as mysterious voices that appeared to emanate from the walls themselves, creating an atmosphere of supernatural surveillance that added to the palace's reputation for mystery and intrigue. These acoustic anomalies gave rise to numerous ghost stories and supernatural legends associated with Versailles, tales of spectral voices that warned of danger or revealed hidden secrets to those fortunate enough to hear them. Courtiers reported hearing the voices of long-dead monarchs echoing through empty rooms, or catching glimpses of figures in outdated court dress moving through corridors that were supposedly unused. While these phenomena likely had rational explanations related to the palace's complex architecture and hidden passages, they added an element of mystery and unease to daily life at Versailles that reinforced the sense that the palace was a place where normal rules did not apply. The hidden passages also played a crucial role during times of political crisis, providing escape routes and secure communications channels that allowed the royal family and their supporters to coordinate their responses to threats without alerting their enemies to their plans. When angry crowds surrounded the palace during the early days of the revolution, members of the royal family used concealed routes to move between supposedly secure locations, though ultimately these passages could not provide protection from the fundamental political changes that were reshaping French society. The hidden corridors that had once been symbols of royal power and mystery became pathways of retreat and desperation, as the old order crumbled around those who had built their lives on its foundations. The story of the palace locksmith during the revolution illustrates the dual nature of these hidden spaces and the complex loyalties they could inspire. This craftsman, who possessed intimate knowledge of Versailles' secret passages and concealed chambers through his work maintaining the palace's elaborate locking mechanisms, became a valuable asset to both royalist and revolutionary forces who sought to use his knowledge for their own purposes. His ability to provide access to hidden rooms and escape routes made him a target for competing factions, each seeking to use his expertise to gain advantage over their enemies. The locksmith story reveals the impossible position in which many palace employees found themselves during the revolution, torn between loyalty to the royal family who had employed them and sympathy for revolutionary ideals that promised to improve their own conditions. His knowledge of the palace's secrets made him powerful, but also dangerous, as both sides recognized that his information could tip the balance in their favor if properly exploited. The ultimate fate of this man, like so many others caught between competing loyalties during this period, remains lost to history. Another casualty of the political upheaval that swept away not just the monarchy, but many of those who had served it. The hidden library of Versailles represents perhaps the most intellectual of the palace's secret spaces, a collection of books and manuscripts that was concealed behind a series of false walls in what appeared to be unused storage rooms in one of the palace's less frequented wings. This collection contained thousands of volumes that were considered too controversial, seditious, or simply unfashionable for display in the palace's public libraries, where the books were chosen as much for their decorative bindings as for their intellectual content. Philosophical works by Voltaire and Rousseau sat alongside political treatises that questioned the divine right of kings, scientific studies that challenged religious orthodoxy, and works of literature that explored themes considered inappropriate for a royal court. Access to this hidden library was restricted to a small circle of intellectually curious courtiers and trusted scholars who had demonstrated both their discretion and their commitment to learning that transcended political boundaries. The collection was maintained by a secret librarian, often a learned priest or scholar who lived quietly within the palace, and devoted his life to preserving and organizing these forbidden texts without drawing attention to their existence or his own role in maintaining them. This shadowy figure represented a commitment to learning and free inquiry that persisted even within an institution dedicated to absolute monarchy and religious orthodoxy. The library included not only books but also manuscripts, correspondence, and documents that provided alternative perspectives on the events and personalities that shaped French history, offering future historians insights into the complexities and contradictions that characterized life at the French court. Many of these documents contained information that contradicted official histories, revealing the gap between public pronouncements and private realities that characterized much of royal life. The library's existence testified to the intellectual curiosity that persisted even among those who lived within systems that officially discouraged questioning and independent thought. The hidden passages and secret chambers of Versailles were not simply architectural curiosities, but integral parts of a complex system that allowed the palace to function as both a public theatre and a private residence, a center of government and a family home, a symbol of absolute power, and a community of human beings with all their needs, desires, and frailties. These spaces enabled the palace to maintain the elaborate fiction that royal life was effortless and natural, while accommodating the reality that it required enormous effort and careful planning to sustain. They provided the infrastructure for both the official business of government and the unofficial networks of influence, romance, and conspiracy that shaped the actual course of French history. As you allow your mind to wander through these hidden passages and secret chambers, consider the layers of human activity that existed within the walls of Versailles, the complex ecosystem of competing interests and hidden agendas that operated behind the facade of royal grandeur. Every public ceremony, every royal audience, every grand ball took place against the backdrop of this hidden world of servants and spies, lovers and conspirators, scholars and revolutionaries, who pursued their own goals within the spaces that the public never saw. The palace that appeared to visitors as a seamless expression of royal power was actually a complex organism where multiple forms of life coexisted, competed, and collaborated in ways that shaped the course of European history. The secret passages of Versailles remind us that history often unfolds in the spaces between official events, in the quiet conversations and private moments that rarely find their way into formal records, but nevertheless determine the fate of nations and individuals. The whispered warnings that prevented disasters, the clandestine meetings that forged alliances, the hurried messages passed through hidden corridors that changed the course of wars. These too are part of the story of one of the world's most famous palaces, and their influence often exceeded that of the formal ceremonies that dominated the public record. In the gentle embrace of approaching sleep, let yourself imagine the countless secrets that these hidden passages have witnessed, and the countless more that remain buried within the walls of Versailles, waiting for future archaeologists and historians to uncover them. The palace continues to yield its mysteries to patient investigators, each discovery adding new dimensions to our understanding of this extraordinary place where public grandeur and private intrigue existed in constant tension, where the business of governing an empire was conducted alongside the intimate dramas of human relationships, and where the fate of millions was often decided in rooms that officially did not exist. The hidden world of Versailles was not separate from its public magnificence, but rather the foundation upon which that magnificence was built. the invisible infrastructure that made visible splendor possible. Behind every golden surface lay the careful planning and discreet engineering that made royal luxury seem effortless. Within every public gesture lay the private calculations and secret negotiations that shaped the course of French history. As the shadows deepen and the sounds of the modern world fade away, allow yourself to become part of this hidden history, a temporary resident of the secret passages where so many others have walked before you, each carrying their own hopes, fears, and carefully guarded secrets through the labyrinthine heart of one of history's most mysterious and magnificent palaces. Chapter 4: Louis XIV's Golden Prison, the Sun King's Elaborate Captivity. As our journey through the hidden worlds of Versailles draws toward its gentle close, let us ascend once more to the grandest stage of all, the royal apartments where Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, lived out the most elaborately choreographed existence in human history. Here in rooms that epitomized absolute power and unlimited wealth, we find perhaps the greatest paradox of Versailles. A man who possessed everything yet owned nothing, not even the simple freedom to wake up alone or to choose when to sleep. The most powerful monarch in European history was also in many ways the most constrained, his every moment governed by protocols, so rigid that they transformed the basic acts of human existence into elaborate state ceremonies. Picture yourself awakening, not to the gentle embrace of natural sleep's end, but to the sound of precisely timed footsteps approaching your bedchamber, each step measured and deliberate, part of a ceremony that has been performed in exactly the same way for decades. That is 7:30 in the morning, and you are Louis XIV, King of France, the most powerful monarch in Europe, ruler of 20 million subjects, commander of the largest army in the world. Yet you cannot rise from your bed until the proper ceremony has been performed, the correct hierarchy observed, and the appropriate courtiers have been assembled to witness your transformation from sleeping mortal to divine ruler. The irony is absolute, unlimited power exercised within the strictest possible constraints, absolute authority that cannot even extend to the freedom of a private yawn. The lever du roi, the king's rising ceremony, was not merely a morning routine, but a carefully orchestrated performance that could last for 90 minutes or more, a complex ballet of ceremony that transformed the simple act of getting out of bed into an elaborate state function, witnessed by dozens of the highest-ranking nobles in France. Your bed, a magnificent construction, carved oak, silk hangings, and gold thread that cost more than most noble families spent in a year, sits in the center of a room designed specifically to accommodate the crowds of observers who gather each morning to witness your awakening. The walls are lined with mirrors that multiply the witnesses to infinity, ensuring that every gesture, every expression, every moment of your awakening is reflected and observed from countless angles, creating a kaleidoscope of royal dignity that reinforces the sacred nature of kingship. The ceremony begins before you are even aware of it. In antechambers beyond your bedchamber, where courtiers have been gathering since dawn, their placement determined by an elaborate hierarchy that assigns specific roles and privileges based on an intricate calculus of birth, marriage, service to the crown, and current levels of royal favor that can change with devastating suddenness. The Grand Chamberlain, the First Gentleman of the Bedchamber, the Captain of the Guards, each has his designated position and prescribed function in the morning's performance roles that have been refined and codified over generations, until they achieve the precision of a military drill, combined with the solemnity of a religious ceremony. Imagine yourself lying in that magnificent bed, consciousness slowly returning from the realm of dreams where, for a few precious hours, you could be simply human rather than a living symbol of divine authority. The silk sheets that surround you are changed daily by servants who handle them with the reverence normally reserved for religious relics, each sheet embroidered with golden fleur-de-lis that catch the morning light streaming through tall windows that face the palace gardens you designed to reflect the order and beauty of your reign. But even in these first moments of consciousness, you cannot simply stretch, yawn, or reach for water as any ordinary person might. Your first movements must be deliberate and dignified, appropriate to your status as God's representative on earth. Every gesture calculated to maintain the illusion of divine perfection that is essential to absolute monarchy. The process of your awakening must appear effortless and natural, yet every element has been planned and rehearsed until it achieves a perfection that seems supernatural to those who witness it. When you signal your readiness to rise, a signal so subtle that only those trained to watch for it can recognize it, The first valet de chambre approaches with a bowl of blessed water for initial ablutions. The simple act of washing your hands and face becomes a sacred ritual, performed with implements of silver and gold, while dozens of pairs of eyes observe your every movement, searching for signs of royal favor or displeasure that might affect their own fortunes. The water itself has been blessed by the royal chaplain, heated to precisely the temperature you prefer, and scented with oils chosen specifically for their associations with majesty and divine authority. The selection of your clothing for the day involves a complex negotiation between practical considerations, political messages, and ceremonial requirements that can take longer than the actual process of getting dressed. Your chemise, the simple undergarment that will touch your royal skin, must be handed to you by the highest-ranking person present. But if a prince of the blood enters the chamber while you are being dressed, the chemise must be passed to him regardless of how far the dressing process has progressed. You might stand naked and cold while this elaborate dance of precedence plays itself out around you, your comfort secondary to the maintenance of a hierarchy so rigid that it governs even the most intimate moments of royal life. This transfer of the royal undergarment can become an elaborate ceremony in itself, as the chemise passes from hand to hand, according to the strict rules of precedence that govern every aspect of court life. The Duke of Orleans might receive it from the Duke of Burgundy, who received it from a lesser duke, who received it from the original attendant, each transfer accompanied by the appropriate bows and gestures of respect that acknowledge the sacred nature of anything that will touch the royal body. Meanwhile, you remain motionless, a living statue waiting for permission to cover your nakedness, your dignity maintained through absolute submission to the protocols that define your divine authority. Your breakfast, when it finally arrives after the completion of the dressing ceremony, is itself a performance that requires its own set of participants and protocols, transforming the simple act of eating into another elaborate demonstration of royal power and divine favor. The grand couvre, the formal royal meal, takes place in a dining room, where every course is presented with the solemnity of a religious ritual, each dish blessed by your presence and transformed from mere food into a sacrament of kingship. You eat alone, seated at a table while courtiers stand at prescribed distances, their positions determined by their rank and their current level of royal favor. Their ability to approach the royal table a privilege that must be earned through service and maintained through constant vigilance. The food that reaches your plate has traveled a complex journey from kitchen to table, passing through the hands of dozens of servants and officials, each responsible for a specific aspect of the meal's preparation and presentation that reflects the elaborate hierarchy that governs every aspect of palace life. The premier maître d'hôtel tastes each dish before it is served, not only to ensure its quality and appropriate seasoning, but to protect you from poison, a very real concern in an age where political assassination was a recognized tool of statecraft and royal paranoia was a survival necessity rather than a character flaw. The tasting itself becomes a ceremony, performed with silver spoons and crystal glasses that are themselves works of art, their surfaces reflecting the candlelight that illuminates every meal regardless of the time of day. Imagine yourself eating this elaborate meal while conscious that every bite, every expression of pleasure or displeasure, every pause between courses is being noted and interpreted by the watching courtiers, whose own fortunes depend on their ability to read the subtle signs of royal mood and preference. Your preferences in food become matters of political significance, as favor toward dishes associated with particular regions or prepared by specific cooks can be interpreted as signals about policy directions, military campaigns, or the rise and fall of various court factions. A simple request for more salt becomes a potential political statement, while the rejection of a particular wine might signal displeasure with the province that produced it. The business of ruling an empire must be conducted within the framework of this endless ceremony, creating a situation where the most important decisions affecting millions of people are made in an atmosphere of theatrical performance that can make serious discussion almost impossible. As your morning audiences, the meetings where the actual work of government takes place, occur in rooms where the spatial arrangements reinforce hierarchy and protocol at the expense of efficiency and clear communication. The prime ministers and advisors approach your desk through a carefully choreographed series of bows and genuflections, their ability to speak determined by rules of precedence that can turn urgent matters of state into elaborate courtly dances where form matters more than substance. Imagine yourself trying to concentrate on complex matters of foreign policy, military strategy, or economic planning, while simultaneously managing the delicate social dynamics of a room filled with competing courtiers, each seeking to advance their own interests through proximity to royal power, and each watching for signs that might indicate shifts in royal favor or policy direction. Every conversation is potentially public, every decision subject to immediate interpretation and speculation by observers who have nothing to do but watch and analyze your behavior for clues about the future direction of French policy. The need to maintain royal dignity and divine authority can make honest discussion of problems almost impossible, as admitting uncertainty or seeking advice might be interpreted as weakness that could undermine the entire system of absolute monarchy. The afternoon hours bring their own ceremonial obligations that transform even recreational activities into elaborate state functions where pleasure becomes another form of work. The promenade through the palace gardens is not a leisurely walk but a formal procession, where your pace, your route, and your companions are all matters of careful planning that reflect political considerations as much as personal preference. The gardens themselves have been designed as an extension of the palace's ceremonial spaces, with carefully planned sight lines and symbolic plantings that reinforce messages about royal power and divine favor, while providing appropriate backdrops for the endless theater of court life. Your interactions with courtiers during these afternoon ceremonies are governed by rules so complex that a single misstep can destroy careers and create lasting enmities that affect not just individuals but entire families for generations. The simple act of acknowledging someone's presence, a nod, a word, a glance, becomes a powerful currency that must be distributed with careful calculation, each gesture weighed for its political implications and potential consequences. Too much attention to one courtier creates jealousy in others that can lead to factionalism and court intrigue, while too little attention to another signals disapproval that can result in political isolation and financial ruin for the unfortunate recipient of royal indifference. The evening brings perhaps the most elaborate ceremonies of the day, transforming the simple act of going to bed into a public spectacle that rivals the morning's rising ceremony in complexity and duration. The grand coucher, your formal retirement, is as complex and time-consuming as the morning's rising ceremony, involving dozens of participants whose roles have been prescribed by centuries of tradition and refined through decades of practice, until they achieve a precision that seems almost supernatural. The process of removing your clothes and preparing for bed requires the participation of numerous attendants, each with specific roles and responsibilities that cannot be altered or simplified without disrupting the entire system that maintains royal authority and reinforces the sacred nature of kingship. The king's bedchamber becomes a theatre where the day's final performance plays out before an audience of carefully selected courtiers, whose presence serves both to witness the royal retirement and to demonstrate their own privileged access to the most intimate moments of royal life. Your nightgown, a magnificent garment of silk and lace that costs more than most people earn in a lifetime, must be presented by the highest-ranking person present, creating another opportunity for the elaborate dance of precedence that governs every aspect of court ceremony. The ceremony of retiring can take more than an hour, as each layer of clothing is removed with deliberate solemnity and appropriate reverence, each garment treated as a sacred relic that has been blessed by contact with the royal body. Yet even when the public ceremonies end and the courtiers finally withdraw to their own apartments, your privacy is more theoretical than real, a carefully maintained fiction that serves the needs of royal dignity while accommodating the practical requirements of security and surveillance that protect absolute monarchy from its enemies. Guards are posted outside your chamber throughout the night, their presence a reminder that even sleep is a political act that requires protection and monitoring. Servants sleep in adjoining rooms, ready to respond to any royal need that might arise during the night, and the constant awareness of being watched and evaluated never entirely disappears, even in the supposed sanctuary of the royal bedchamber. Your most intimate moments, illness, grief, joy, anger, become matters of state concern that must be managed and interpreted for their political implications, rather than experienced as simple human emotions. The royal cold becomes a potential diplomatic crisis if foreign ambassadors interpret royal sneezing as a sign of weakness that might affect military alliances. Royal laughter must be carefully modulated to avoid giving offense to those who are not included in the joke, while royal tears can be seen as either admirable sensitivity or dangerous weakness depending on the political needs of the moment. Even your dreams, when you remember them, become potential sources of political interpretation, as courtiers search for divine messages or prophetic visions that might guide state policy. The management of your romantic relationships requires its own elaborate ceremonial structure that transforms even the most private emotions into public performances governed by protocol and political necessity. The position of maîtresse en titre, official royal mistress, comes with its own apartments, its own household, and its own complex web of ceremonies and protocols that parallel those governing the queen, while creating additional layers of court intrigue and political maneuvering. Madame de Montespan, Madame de Maintenon, and the succession of women who shared your affections found themselves trapped in roles almost as constrained as your own, their every action subject to court scrutiny and political interpretation that made genuine intimacy almost impossible to achieve. Imagine yourself trying to experience genuine human emotion, love, desire, companionship, within a framework where every relationship serves political purposes, and every private moment carries public consequences that can affect the stability of the monarchy and the fate of the nation. The letters you exchange with your lovers are read by secretaries whose job is to ensure that royal correspondence contains nothing that might compromise state security or provide ammunition for political enemies. Your gifts to them are noted and analyzed for their political significance. The choice of jewels or fabrics interpreted as signals about policy directions or changes in the balance of court factions. Your time together is scheduled and supervised like affairs of state, with protocols governing everything from the appropriate times for romantic meetings to the proper etiquette for dismissing a royal mistress who has fallen from favor. The burden of performance extends even to your relationship with your legitimate queen, Marie Thérèse of Austria, your wife and the mother of your heir, whose own elaborate ceremonial existence parallels your own, while creating additional complications for the expression of marital affection and family life. Your interactions with her are governed by protocols that leave little room for spontaneous affection or private conversation, every gesture weighted with political significance that transforms marital intimacy into another form of state ceremony. Even arguments between husband and wife become matters of diplomatic concern, as royal discord can be interpreted as instability that might affect international alliances or encourage domestic opposition to the monarchy. The royal marriage bed itself becomes a stage where the production of heirs is conducted according to schedule and witnessed, however discreetly, by those whose job it is to ensure the continuation of the royal line. The most intimate aspects of human relationship are transformed into matters of state policy, with physicians monitoring the Queen's reproductive health and courtiers speculating about the frequency of royal conjugal visits, as if the royal bedroom were another department of government subject to public oversight and political analysis. Even marital intimacy becomes a performance governed by considerations of dynasty and diplomacy, rather than personal affection or human desire. The physical toll of this ceremonial existence is enormous, creating health problems that cannot be acknowledged or treated without compromising the illusion of divine perfection that is essential to absolute monarchy. Standing for hours during elaborate ceremonies creates chronic back pain that no amount of royal privilege can relieve, while maintaining perfect posture during long formal meals results in digestive problems that must be hidden from public view. The weight of ceremonial clothing and regalia, including crowns that can weigh several pounds and robes made from the heaviest fabrics available, creates constant physical discomfort that cannot be acknowledged or relieved, without compromising royal dignity and the appearance of effortless divine authority. Your body, like every other aspect of your existence, belongs not to you but to the state, and its comfort is secondary to its symbolic function as the physical embodiment of French royal power. Royal illnesses must be managed as political crises, with physicians chosen as much for their discretion as their medical skill and treatments selected for their compatibility with public appearances rather than their therapeutic effectiveness. The simple act of aging becomes a political problem that requires careful management, as signs of physical decline can be interpreted as weakness that might encourage domestic rebellion or foreign aggression against a monarchy whose power depends on the appearance of invincible strength. The psychological pressure of constant performance creates its own form of exhaustion that goes beyond physical fatigue, a mental weariness that comes from the knowledge that you can never relax, never let your guard down, never simply be human without considering the political implications of your humanity. Every gesture must be calculated, every word weighed, every expression carefully controlled to maintain the illusion of divine authority and perfect self-control that is essential to absolute monarchy. The need to appear omniscient and infallible creates enormous pressure to hide uncertainty, doubt, and human frailty behind a mask of royal confidence that becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as the years pass and the burden of performance accumulates. The courtiers who surround you daily are engaged in their own desperate performances, competing for attention, favor, and position in a system where royal displeasure can mean social and financial destruction that affects not just individuals but entire families for generations. Their elaborate costumes, their carefully practiced mannerisms, their endless intrigues and conspiracies create a perpetual theater of ambition that surrounds you with artificial relationships and calculated displays of loyalty that make genuine human connection almost impossible to achieve. Everyone wants something from the king, and their ability to provide authentic friendship or honest counsel is compromised by their dependence on royal favor for their survival and prosperity. Yet within this golden prison, moments of genuine human connection occasionally break through the ceremonial barriers that separate you from authentic relationships and real emotional satisfaction. A trusted valet who has served you for decades and remembers your childhood before you became a symbol. A confessor who sees past the crown to the soul beneath. A mistress who occasionally forgets your royal status long enough to treat you as a man rather than a monarch. These relationships provide precious reminders of your fundamental humanity and the person you might have been in different circumstances. They offer glimpses of the authentic life that exists somewhere beneath the layers of ceremony and protocol that define your daily existence. The creation of Versailles itself can be understood as both the ultimate expression of your power and the construction of your own magnificent cage. A palace that embodies your vision of absolute monarchy while creating the physical framework for your own captivity. Every room, every garden path, every architectural detail was designed to reinforce your authority and create appropriate settings for the endless ceremonies that defined royal life. But in building this monument to absolute power, you also created the stage where your own freedom would be sacrificed to the demands of symbolic perfection. The palace that was meant to demonstrate your control over your environment became the environment that controlled you, its elaborate requirements governing your every movement and transforming your home into a theater where you were simultaneously the star performer and the captive audience. The irony of your situation becomes most apparent in your later years, as age and illness begin to limit your physical capabilities while the ceremonial demands of kingship remain unchanged, and possibly even more demanding, as courtiers seek to preserve the illusion of royal invincibility. The body that once embodied divine authority begins to fail, yet the requirements of royal performance continue unabated, creating a situation where you must maintain dignity and authority even as human frailty makes the basic acts of walking, eating, and speaking increasingly difficult and painful. The gap between the symbol and the man becomes more pronounced with each passing year, yet the system of absolute monarchy allows no acknowledgement of this growing contradiction. Your daily routine, once a source of comfort and predictability, becomes a burden, as physical limitations make the elaborate ceremonies more difficult to endure, while the political necessity of maintaining appearances prevents any modification of protocols that have become sacred traditions in their own right. The lever and cowsher ceremonies that once demonstrated royal power now serve primarily to hide royal weakness, their elaborate choreography designed as much to conceal the king's physical limitations as to celebrate his divine authority. The same courtiers who once competed for the privilege of dressing you now struggle to maintain the fiction of royal perfection, while accommodating the reality of human decay that cannot be acknowledged without undermining the entire system of absolute monarchy. The final years of your reign reveal the ultimate cost of absolute power, a profound loneliness that no amount of ceremony can address, and no degree of luxury can heal. Surrounded by thousands of people who depend on your favor for their survival, you nevertheless experience an isolation that is almost complete, as the protocols that govern your relationships prevent anyone from approaching you as a simple human being, rather than as a source of political advantage. The courtiers who compete for your attention are motivated by self-interest rather than genuine affection, and their elaborate displays of loyalty serve their own needs rather than providing you with the authentic human connections that make life meaningful. The ceremonies that define your days have become hollow rituals, performed by rote rather than conviction, their original purpose lost in the endless repetition of meaningless gestures that no longer carry the power to inspire or comfort. When death finally approaches, even this most private and universal human experience must be transformed into a public ceremony that serves the needs of the state, rather than providing comfort to the dying man. That your dying becomes a matter of political importance, with physicians, priests, and courtiers all playing their prescribed roles in the final performance of your reign, rather than simply helping you face the end of life with dignity and peace. At your last words, your final gestures, your manner of facing death, all become elements in the historical record that will define your legacy, their significance determined by political necessity rather than personal meaning. And even in death, you remain a prisoner of the role you have played for so many decades, unable to experience the final human moment as anything other than a state function that must be performed correctly for the benefit of those who will survive you. The Sun King's legacy is thus a complex mixture of magnificent achievement and profound human cost, a testament to what absolute power can create, and a warning about what it inevitably destroys. The Palace of Versailles stands as one of humanity's greatest architectural and artistic achievements, a masterpiece that continues to inspire wonder and admiration more than 3 centuries after its creation. Yet it also serves as a monument to the price of absolute power, a reminder that even the most enviable positions can become prisons and that the pursuit of perfection in human institutions often requires the sacrifice of the very humanity they are meant to serve. Your reign transformed France into the dominant power in Europe and created cultural standards that influenced civilization for generations, but it also demonstrated the impossibility of sustaining absolute authority without destroying the authentic human relationships and personal freedom that give life its meaning and joy. As you drift toward the gentle embrace of sleep, consider the ultimate paradox of Louis XIV's existence, a man who had everything yet possessed nothing that was truly his own, who commanded millions yet could not control his own daily schedule, who lived in the most beautiful palace ever built, yet was never free to enjoy it as a simple home. His story reminds us that true freedom cannot be purchased with wealth or maintained through power, but exists in the simple ability to be authentically oneself, to form genuine relationships, and to experience life without the constant awareness of being watched, judged, and interpreted by others whose interests conflict with one's own happiness and well-being. The servants who cleaned his chambers, the courtiers who attended his ceremonies, the artists who immortalized his image, all were witness to this extraordinary experiment in human authority and its costs, their observations preserved in memoirs and letters that reveal the man behind the monarchy and the human being beneath the symbol. Their testimony reminds us that behind every display of absolute power lies a person who pays the price for that power in the currency of authentic human experience, personal freedom, and the simple pleasures that make life worth living regardless of one's position in the hierarchies that govern human society. In the end, the Sun King's golden prison reminds us that the pursuit of absolute control, whether over others or over our own circumstances, often results in the loss of the very things we seek to protect and preserve. True power lies not in the ability to command others, but in the freedom to choose our own responses to the circumstances we cannot control. And true wealth exists not in the accumulation of material possessions, but in the cultivation of relationships and experiences that nourish the human spirit and provide meaning that transcends the temporary arrangements of political and social power. The most magnificent palace in the world could not provide its royal inhabitant with the simple freedom that you enjoy as you settle into sleep. The freedom to close your eyes when you choose, to dream without supervision, and to wake in your own time according to the natural rhythms of rest and renewal that no ceremony can improve and no protocol can enhance. As our journey through the worlds of Versailles draws to its gentle close, we return to the present moment, to your comfortable bed, and the peaceful darkness that surrounds you. The palace that once housed these extraordinary lives now stands as a museum, its corridors filled with tourists rather than courtiers, its chambers echoing with guided explanations rather than whispered conspiracies. Yet in the quiet hours between sleep and waking, the palace still holds its secrets. The servant who rose before dawn to begin another day of invisible labor, the queen trapped in her beauty routines and political obligations, the hidden passages that sheltered lovers and conspirators, the king imprisoned in his own magnificence, all of these lives continue to resonate in the stones and shadows of Versailles. Their stories remind us that human nature remains constant across the centuries. The desire for dignity, the need for authentic connection, the struggle between duty and personal happiness, the complex dance of power and vulnerability, these elements of human experience transcend historical periods and social positions. As you settle deeper into rest, let yourself feel gratitude for the simple freedoms that these historical figures could never enjoy. The ability to wake naturally, to choose your own clothing, to eat when and what you please, to form relationships based on affection rather than advantage, to speak honestly without fear of political consequences. These seemingly ordinary aspects of modern life would have seemed like impossible luxuries to the inhabitants of Versailles. The palace that once symbolized the height of human achievement and the pinnacle of political power now serves a different purpose. It stands as a reminder that all human institutions, no matter how magnificent or seemingly permanent, are temporary creations that rise and fall with the tide of history. The servants, the queens, the courtiers, and the kings all played their roles on history's stage and then departed, leaving behind only the stories we tell about their lives. In the gentle rhythm of your breathing and the comfortable weight of your blankets, you possess freedoms that no amount of 18th century wealth could purchase. Your private thoughts remain truly private. Your relationships are your own to choose and nurture, and your daily routine serves your own needs rather than the demands of ceremony and protocol. The hidden passages of Versailles still wind through the palace walls, but they no longer carry secrets that could topple governments or destroy reputations. The chambers where Marie Antoinette endured her elaborate beauty rituals now display her jewelry and gowns to curious visitors. The rooms where Louis XIV held court have become spaces for contemplation and education, rather than political maneuvering. Yet something of their original purpose remains. Versailles continues to inspire wonder, to provoke reflection on the nature of power and privilege, and to remind us of the complex relationship between individual human lives and the larger forces of history. The palace that once housed the most powerful people in Europe now serves all of humanity as a place of learning and remembrance. As sleep draws nearer, let your mind rest in the knowledge that you are part of this continuing story. The choices you make, the relationships you build, the work you do, and the love you share all contribute to the ongoing human narrative that began long before Versailles was built and will continue long after its stones have crumbled to dust. The servants who struggled through their daily routines, the queen who faced her tragic destiny with dignity, the secrets that were whispered in hidden passages, and the king who lived in a golden cage all become part of your own understanding of what it means to be human. Their experiences, separated from yours by centuries and circumstances, nevertheless speak to universal truths about ambition, suffering, love, and the persistent human desire for meaning and connection. In this peaceful moment, as your body settles into complete relaxation and your mind prepares for the restoration of sleep, you carry within you the wisdom of their stories. The Palace of Versailles, with all its splendor and sorrow, its public magnificence and private struggles, its visible grandeur and hidden complexity, becomes not just a historical curiosity, but a mirror that reflects the continuing human journey toward understanding, compassion, and authentic living. Rest now in the comfort of your own free choices and private peace, grateful for the simple blessing of a life lived on your own terms, carrying with you the gentle lessons of those who came before, and trusting in the promise of peaceful dreams that no ceremony can disturb and no protocol can govern. Let the rhythm of history carry you gently towards sleep, knowing that in your rest you honor both the struggles of the past and the possibilities of the future, finding in the darkness not the absence of light, but the promise of a new dawn that will be entirely your own to greet and shape as you choose. Sleep well, and dream of the freedom that no palace walls can contain, and no golden chains can bind. The eternal human capacity for hope, love, and the quiet dignity that belongs to every individual soul, regardless of their station in life or their place in the grand theatres of history.